I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Tracey Yokas, the author of Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. I was first introduced to Tracey and her book through a mutual friend and was immediately intrigued. Having experienced raising a teenager in crisis myself, I knew I not only wanted to read the book, but also have her on the show. In this episode, we talk about her experience raising a daughter with an eating disorder and how this experience changed not only her relationship with her daughter, but also her view of herself. We also talk about breaking generational patterns and the importance of prioritizing your own well-being so you can remain strong for your teenager. And in reading Tracey's book, I was reminded of how isolated I felt as a parent, watching my own daughter slip deeper and deeper into the throes of anxiety and depression. This experience is why I became a coach for parents, because I know how difficult these years can be as a parent, even if your teenager is not in the throes of a mental health crisis. If you're looking for a partner on this journey, someone who will help you along the way, someone who's been there and done that, I encourage you to schedule a consultation with me to learn about how we can work together one-on-one. The link to schedule is in the show notes. Now, without further ado, on to the episode. Welcome to the podcast, Tracey. I am really looking forward to this conversation about your book, Bloodlines. This is such an important dialogue to have, and I'm just honored that you came here to talk about your book and your experience with your daughter. So before we get into the things that I really would love to ask you and talk about, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to my audience.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Tracey Yokas. I am an author, an artist, a facilitator, I hope sometimes an inspirer. I am really passionate over the last 12 years of our journey about breaking down the stigma around talking about mental health, mental illness, mental wellness. Every single one of us has a brain inside our head, so we all have mental health, and it's been, since the pandemic, more important than ever for us to all start talking about mental health, because whether we know someone or not who is struggling, we know. The statistics bear this out. So I just really appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you and to share our story.
Yes, and I really enjoy. I came across your name in your book through another friend of mine, Darlene Childress. You were on her podcast, and I saw your book and I saw what it was about, and I immediately said to myself, I want to have a conversation with her. And for multiple reasons, obviously being a podcast host, I'm here to support other parents, but also personal reasons. I myself, as I've talked about on my podcast, have a daughter who has really struggled with her mental health. Both of my daughters have, but that's kind of what got me into my line of work. And I was like, I need to read that book. I need to talk more with Tracey about this and bring her on the show. So thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. So your book, Bloodlines, is so beautifully written. It wasn't easy for me to read, but at the same time, it was really great for me to read because there are multiple themes throughout the book that resonate with me so deeply. One, of course, being with your journey with walking next to your teenager as she was struggling with mental health challenges. The other also being your experience growing up and your body image issues and all of the narratives that were presented to you growing up, as they were to all of us, and the challenges that definitely came with that, and really how the two coincide. And the first thing that I'd really love to touch upon is there was a moment in the book where you were in your therapist's office, which being in your therapist's office, so important when you're in any situation, but especially when you're helping your teenager walk through some really mental health challenges. But your therapist mentioned something about how your daughter needs to see you caring for yourself. And what you had said was here's a quote: I wondered how a mother could take care of herself while her child languished. And that really hit me because it is one of the biggest challenges of being a caretaker is how do I care for myself, especially when my child is struggling so much. So could you tell me a little bit more about your experience with that?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, talking about self care and moms in particular caring for ourselves is really high on my list of priorities. I hope younger generations are a little bit better at this. And if they listen to podcasts like this, they will be, because I think one of the primary things, first of all, is that we were sold a bill of goods about what self care actually is and the purpose behind it. So, while of course I love a good mani pedi as much as the next guy, I love a massage, I love all of those kinds of things. In my purview or my opinion, that's only really half of the battle, because that's the sort of self care that works its way into us from the outside. And I look at it more as a two-way street. So we can get 1,000 trillion mani pedis. If we are not okay on our inside, those mani pedis aren't going to make a difference.
Right.
So if we have patterns from our childhood, unhealthy patterns, which most of us do, we're human
Yeah.
beings. Our parents were imperfect, we're imperfect. It has nothing to do with blame or any of that stuff. We just learn what we learned about it. Plus, in our consumeristic culture, it's about spending money, it's about looking a certain way and whatever, and all of that has nothing to do with it. So, what I really had to learn ultimately was that taking care of myself is an act of service to the people that I love most. And I literally cannot be the mother I want to be, the friend, the wife, the person, if I never put myself on my list. If I never prioritize my health, my wellness, my relationships, my wants, and my needs. Now, that comes with a learning curve for a lot of us, because when we start to dip our toe into this idea of taking care of ourselves, regardless of where our family members may be in their own struggles, this can really, especially if we have people pleasing tendencies or any of these other kind of things that so many of us have, we can really be just broadsided with guilt and
Mhm.
shame, which is why therapy is so important, because we don't know this stuff until we have a reason to know it. And
Mhm.
how can we deal with something that we didn't even know we needed to deal with without somebody to help us and guide us through that process? So
Yeah.
I firmly 100% believe there's not a person on the planet, literally, who could not benefit from good therapy. I
Mhm.
know, of course, that there are problems with access and all kinds of things,
Yeah.
but ultimately, plus, where do we think the stamina comes from?
Right.
Supporting a child who is having significant mental health struggles is, for anyone who is going through it now, you already know, I don't have to say it, it is so chaotic,
Mhm.
so terrifying, so draining. And I did all the things. I completely stopped taking care of myself. Not that I was doing great before. I withdrew from all my friends. I neglected all the things that, used to be part of who I was. And
Mhm.
this only further exacerbates the problem. So it's such an important thing to talk about, because it's very, very hard to shift that narrative when we've been convinced our whole life that it's selfish or
Yeah.
wrong or any of those things.
That's so true. And as caretakers and nurturers, and especially as women, we have been conditioned to put the needs of other people first, to our detriment, very much so. And what you're saying definitely resonates with me. I was definitely somebody who would always say, everybody should go to therapy. Everybody needs to go to therapy. And was I going to therapy? Nope. It wasn't until my daughter was in crisis that I started going to therapy. And thank goodness I did. And also, this notion of self care is the thought behind it can often be like, it's caring for yourself, it feels good. But therapy doesn't necessarily feel good. it doesn't feel good at all sometimes. It's like doing that hard work yourself so that you can be strong for the people you care about the most. And that was
Absolutely.
definitely a theme throughout your book that I noticed and appreciated, and highlighting the importance of that in whether your child is struggling in crisis or not. It's essential for you to be able to address the things that are weighing you down so that you're not passing them on to the people you care about.
100%. And I mean, as parents, don't we want our children, regardless of their gender, to grow into adults who take care of themselves? I
Yeah.
mean, I totally missed. And I mean, for years, like it took me 10 years to write the book, as I said. So I missed that I was wanting my daughter to do, my therapist was asking me to do what I wanted my daughter to do, which was
Hmm.
ultimately to take better care of herself.
Right.
So, and we can only actually control ourselves. So we can't control anybody else. So I just totally didn't get it.
Yeah. It's leading by example for sure. You know, they see you, it's normalized that this is how we care for ourselves through the hard times and through the good times. This is a
Absolutely.
lifestyle choice.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. It's a point of view. Yes, that's how I'd like to say it as well.
Right, exactly. And it's like challenging those paradigms that we were raised with. Like, you got to hold it in, you got to toughen it up, you got to stuff it down, right? We're going to, just suck it up and move on. But then it comes up later in a different way. So, yeah.
Absolutely 100% agree. The universe is always going to keep presenting us with opportunities to learn this stuff. And I feel like, that started happening for me long before I married, long before I had my daughter, long before she became ill. And what I have thought a lot about in retrospect is that my own suffering was not enough
Uh-huh.
because of the type of childhood I had and the issues that I needed to work on healing from. My own suffering was never going to be enough to break that shell or peel back that onion or whatever way you like to look at it. It wasn't until I saw my daughter suffering
Right.
and the suffering of my own self was so profound. Those two things together was what was required for me to hit my emotional rock bottom
Right.
before I could then go, oh, that's okay. Now I'm starting to understand why I have this all backwards and why my
Right.
therapist has been saying this for so long and why taking care of myself is so important. And I wasn't fooling anybody really with my low self esteem, including myself, and issues like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about your experience supporting your daughter. And so much of what you wrote about is exactly parallel to my experience with my daughter. The noticing that there is something going on, the getting the diagnosis, the getting the support, it's not enough support, the getting deeper support, and then the ups and downs of it all. And so, one of the things that stood out to me that I would like to talk about for a moment is how, when your daughter returned from one of her treatments, it was for the disordered eating, her self-harming really ramped up, and that you were told that this is normal, this is a normal part, and that's why it's so challenging. So tell me a little bit more about, explain how you navigated the ups and downs of that. Like, of course you had therapy, but how was your experience in supporting her through, like, we're dealing with this behavior, but this new behavior is popping up? And how did you remain supportive through that?
Well, I mean, I think the short answer is at the beginning and for a long time, not well. I mean, we were completely unprepared for any of this, as any parents are when their child starts to struggle. And I just had this belief that it was like, okay, I'm just going to do what they say. And, okay, this is happening. We'll get her into therapy. She'll do what they say. We'll take the recommendations. And, she'll understand she has to eat food to stay alive and, all these things. And then we'll just get on with our lives. And of course, as you so eloquently described, that is exactly not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, I did not have the skills that I had to learn again down the line. I didn't understand this yet. So if she became upset, I instantly became upset. And then, it was a huge chaos and crisis, and there's yelling and crying and screaming
Mm-hmm.
and whatever. I, every time it changed, you feel like, okay, we did this and it didn't work. It's very demoralizing. And what I wish I could have done better, and I think this is totally normal, but I still wish I could have done a better job, is
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we miss the forest for the trees. And what I mean by that is my mother had passed away very suddenly, like 3 weeks before my daughter's symptoms began. Anecdotally, this is something I'm hearing more and more as I go on this journey, that, a significant loss happens and then the child is struggling. So that's one thing. I hope somebody's researching, better ways for all of us parents and providers to handle situations like this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like we became so focused on the symptoms, the not eating or the eating and vomiting or the self harm, which, of course, again, makes perfect sense. These are very dangerous behaviors our children and adults can engage in. But I also feel like we got so wrapped up in that and we were so scared, and again, not having good tools to call on, that it just became about symptom management or trying to manage the symptoms without having a better understanding of what was going on with her, with the whole family,
Yeah.
how to manage our reactions. So, yeah, I mean, when you're going through that, if I had known then what I know now, I would have handled my own self care much differently. I was reacting to everything, not responding. I had
Yeah.
no mechanism for being able to remain calm, neither did my husband. And so we were just in a constant state of chaos.
Yeah, and that's really the chaos is the underlying theme of walking through this with a child who is struggling with mental health. It's the unpredictability of it all. It's the lack of understanding, the lack of resources, the lack of really just clarity on what am I supposed to do. And of course, it's like you're in a constant state of fight or flight and you're prepared for the other shoe to drop at all times, even when things are quote unquote going well or better.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, when's this all going to fall apart? And, I got to be prepared for that. And so your nervous system is taxed. And so when something happens, a behavior or a disagreement or a fear of this might set her off and completely derail her, that's going to impact your ability to stay calm or to stay grounded and access your rational decision making mind when it's time. And so it kind of adds to the chaos. And I know for myself, it wasn't until I went through this experience with my daughter that I realized that I was codependent with her. From her, the moment I found out she was pregnant, I was pregnant with her. There was a codependency. And as such, I took on her emotions from the moment she was born. I knew when she needed to eat. I knew when she was tired. I get anxious when I knew it was time for her to go to bed, all the way through. And so it was like our anxiety fed off each other that whole time. And it wasn't until she was really in crisis and getting treatment and in a residential program that I was able to step back and be like, oh, I see what's happening here. And that is not helpful, which goes back to the whole importance of having conversations with a therapist so that they can be presented to you. Because I had no idea up
Mm-hmm.
until that point.
Yes, and it brings in, for my perspective anyway, the generational trauma aspect of it,
Yep.
because these are patterns that repeat.
Yeah.
And so, whether I happen to do have a diagnosis of complex PTSD, but I just received that diagnosis a couple years ago. And
Yeah.
so I've been in and out of therapy since I was 30. I'm 56. So
Hmm.
this was like life altering. It just made so many things make sense.
Yeah.
But my point is, whether or not you don't have to have a diagnosis to have unhealthy patterns passing down through families.
Right.
So, in a grander scheme of being cycle breakers, these are the kind of things we want to look for, whether we deem ourselves to be traumatized or not, because
Hmm.
I gaslit myself for most of my life, because I didn't grow up in poverty. I grew up
Hmm.
with two parents in the home. I wasn't sexually or physically abused and all these things. It was like, what do I have to complain about? Well, that's fine to have discernment as an adult, but when we're, being born and we're being raised, we don't have that kind of cognitive wherewithal.
Right.
So, I just didn't understand because I couldn't see it, the reality. And again, this isn't about parent bashing or family bashing because I
Right.
actually never had more compassion for my parents than I did when I fully began to understand because it didn't start with them either.
Right.
So it's just so important because why is it we think we can't or we don't know, how to be there for our kids? Well, how would we know
Right.
if we didn't learn that, way back when? So it is often in situations like ours where whatever was working, quote unquote, because we have codependency in my situation 100% as well.
Hmm.
But it usually requires something like a crisis or whatever when the functioning of the whole is interrupted
Yeah.
for the to kind of break open, that sliver of
Yeah.
space to start going, oh, wait a minute, you mean not everybody is like this? Not everybody thinks this way about themselves? Not every, whoa, are you
Right.
kidding? I mean, it can be really shocking.
It's like shining the light on all the parts of you that you didn't even want to see.
Exactly.
Like, I didn't need to know that, but I'm glad I do. And that's the whole point. It's the cycle breaking. You're going to address those things so that they don't carry on for your kids, for their kids, and such. And I love that you highlight the fact that this isn't placing blame on anything. And that's the whole truth of generational trauma is everybody is working from the conditions for which they're presented. So there's no blame here. It's just you are where you are and you make decisions as you go. And both you and I have been in situations where we've been thrown into life experiences where we were forced to look at ourselves. And I've learned a lot through, and it sounds like you have too. And which brings me to the next thing that I wanted to bring up was the experience you had when the idea was presented to you to have your daughter participate in an intensive outpatient therapy program, and your immediate concern was, oh gosh, well, what about her education, right? And of course you're going to be concerned about that, but the therapist had said to you, an education won't matter if she kills herself. I read that and I was like, whew, it is true. And your parental, you're parenting from everything is quote unquote normal. So education is a top priority. But if your child is suffering to the point where their safety and their life is at risk, education does not matter. And that's something I talk with a lot of the parents that I work with about. So in looking back on that, tell me a little bit more about how that went when she started healing and her educational journey after you were able to step back and prioritize mental health. Tell me a little bit more about the journey from there.
Sure, I really appreciate that question. Well, first of all, I think again, we can tie this to generational expectations, right?
Mhm.
Because those are expectations that get handed down to us. I was expected to get an education, go to college, blah, 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 blah. I never
Yeah.
questioned that. I just did it because that's what was expected. And so I had a daughter and she was going to go to school and she was going to graduate. And blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that's the point of view that you look at it from, again, until you're challenged in this way. And then it was like, perhaps not the most delicately presented to me, but at that point it was like, I think the time for delicacy, was
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
So at that point we did pull her out of school. It would have been eighth grade. So she missed most of her eighth grade year.
Okay.
So she then went to treatment full time at that. She could live at home at that point, and she was going to the treatment center in our town. But it again quickly became clear that the behaviors were worsening instead of getting better. So it wasn't long before they were telling us she needed residential treatment.
Mhm.
And so education and residential treatment is, theoretically it happens, but of course,
Yeah.
realistically it doesn't. So we just had to work on accepting that, we would deal with her education in whatever way made sense when we were able, once again, to do that. And so, what that looked like for us is we went through the IEP process.
Right.
We snuck it in under the wire of what would have been the end of the school year for her for eighth grade,
Yeah.
so that we got approved and had available services for summer. So she got some tutoring in math and English for that
Mhm.
summer. And then she was able to start her freshman year of high school with all her friends, and that's what she wanted to do. So we
Yeah.
also then had support through the IEP
Mhm.
while school was in session. So she had support with the school psychologist. We had a wraparound program,
Mhm.
and a variety of things. And there were a lot of checks and balances in place helping her socially, emotionally. It was not all easy, of course, for her or for us.
Right.
And she would have to leave class sometimes, and that
Mhm.
made her feel really upset. Like, look, it was so obvious that something was going on. But ultimately, the IEP process and having an IEP in place, which she kept. She actually did so well. We worked out of it by her senior year,
Okay.
but it just afforded us so many services that we would not have had access to if not for that process. And that's why it's there. I
Yeah.
mean, the individualized education plan is exactly there to help kids who have needs like this.
Mhm.
But it was reiterated when she went into residential treatment because the first place didn't work, and so that we left there, and there was another place. But it was said in another way there that really resonated with me because all of us parents were worried and struggling with the same thing. Our
Right.
kids aren't in school. What's going to happen with their education? And it was another one of the moms whose son was graduating from that program who said, I know how hard it is to hear, but like there's GEDs there. And it's so true when you stop
Mhm.
back and think, like, after you graduated from high school, did anyone give a crap? I mean,
No.
was anybody like, show me that? I mean, yes, you need, your diploma, but it's not
Right.
like, I'm like, who cares? You
Yeah.
did it and like, whatever. There's lots of ways to get it done, is my point. But
Mhm.
again, we have our thoughts about it. And until they
Mhm.
get challenged, that's what we think. And it's supposed to go that way.
Right. That's so true. And it's interesting. My daughter also got her IEP at the very end of her eighth grade year. And it was really a lifesaver for us to be able to have that communication with the school. So that really does highlight the importance of having your network and your team and not feeling like you need to do it all on your own because that's too much of a burden to bear.
Completely agree. And, I don't know how it went for your experience, but for our experience, I hate to use the word pushback because that makes it sound like they just didn't want to do it. And I think the counselor at the school was just kind of clueless. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that they were so against it. It's like the thought just didn't even enter her mind.
Yeah.
So it was my therapist who happens to have a relationship with the school districts who was like, this is what I want you to do.
Yeah.
So I'm just sharing that to say, like, don't, like, because for a while they were saying, like, well, she's not at school. What can we do about it? And we're like,
Yeah.
well, aren't you supposed to tell us? Like, what are we supposed to do about it? Like, who's supposed to be in charge of this
Yeah.
situation? And so don't take no for an answer, is what I'm saying. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes you're just talking to people who don't know what they're talking about. And there's laws about this kind of stuff, at least for now. So, you just go in and say, this is what's happening. We need help. I know there's things, to help us. What's the process? What do we do?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. They're on your side, but they may not be seeing what you're seeing. You know, she's your daughter sounds like was had a brave face when she was at school, and her academics might have been okay, so they didn't see any concern for it. That wasn't, I mean, you said that your daughter was missing a lot of school. It's the same thing for my daughter. She missed a ton of school. I worked at the school that she was at, so I happened to know the people there, so they knew our story and they knew what was going on, so I didn't have that same experience. But that's a really good reminder of being able to advocate for what's needed and share the challenges that you're having so that you can get the support for her that you need on the educational side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times it's as simple to your point of that, they're looking at my daughter, similar to yours, who they don't have learning disabilities. It's not about that kind of thing. So they're kind of forgetting the social emotional part, and they just, because that's not a standard, at least then, I don't know if it is now, but that was not a standard part of the testing process. So they were kind of like, what are you talking about? I mean, she gets great grades, whatever. It's like, yeah, well, that's not the whole story. Just like for any human being on the planet, who we are outside is only a sliver of who we really are.
That is so true. And I fortunately can say that more recently, there's been a lot more support services and awareness around non academic needs because there's been a lot more need in mental health, especially with Gen Z and COVID lockdown and just mental health in general. So, yeah, that's a really good reminder. So, I wanted to talk briefly about there was a part in the book that I read it and I was like, was she with me? Because the experience was so the same. And that was when you were in the ER with your daughter waiting for a bed. And first of all, it's like an out of body experience to be in that situation. You're tired. There's lights, there's people, there's chaos, there's people coming in, making sure she's safe. They take her stuff. And it's like, is this my life? Is this really happening? But the fact that you have to wait for that bed, there's a lack of places for them to go. There's just a lack of resources. And that experience going through that, and I call it trauma because for me it was part of my trauma, and then returning home after she's gone to where she's safe and seeing the empty room. It's like I said, an out of body experience. And I know during that time, I experienced a lot of dissociation, a lot of just like, I am doing the things that I know that I need to be doing to be a person. I mean, I had another daughter too that I needed to care for. And I've had to do a lot of work since then to heal from that experience. But if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about how you navigated that and how just basically your husband and the dynamic with that, and just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question too. I mean, the simple, quick answer is not well at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, similarly, I gained 40 pounds while my daughter was going through the worst. So, like, basically in a year. Drank a lot when she was in residential because it was like I, didn't have to quote unquote worry anymore because she wasn't under our same roof. And so these methods of coping, dissociation, 12 hours of television a day when life afforded that opportunity, or, eating and drinking away the pain was the only way I knew to do it then. So we did not have the skills. I did not have the skills to make different choices. And to your point, also, I think I was probably, I mean, I'm essentially a walking fawn trauma response as an adult human. So
Mm-hmm.
at that point, I agree with you. I don't know what exact moment I dissociated, but I think I was probably, not in my sane quote unquote mind for a really long time after that point, but didn't really know that. I mean, sure, of course I knew I shouldn't,
Yeah.
drink away my pain and eat away my pain, but knowing and doing are obviously two different things, especially before you've done the healing work
Yeah.
to understand why you started engaging in those behaviors in the first place and what purpose they serve. and
Right.
how reliant you are on them. And they do take the numbing. The whole point of numbing and why we do it is because it works and it takes the
Yeah.
pain away.
Yeah.
So, if we don't have some other way to deal with that thing, that's what we're going to do.
Right.
So it took a very long time. And I would say it wasn't until after my daughter came home, she was able to remain home over summer. She started her freshman year of high school. And it wasn't easy, but it was heading, in the better direction for her that my therapist's message finally cut through. And I think I started coming back, to some semblance of reality and began to understand why she had been asking me for a year and 3/4 what I could do to take care of myself and
Right.
why that would be important and what else it would do, not only for my daughter to see me taking care of myself, but what would it do for me? And what would it mean to my life? And now it's been 12 years. So, a lot has changed. We can only take it one step at a time. So I don't want somebody, listening to us who maybe is where we were or I was then and think, oh, you just make a decision and then, lickety split, everything's fine. It's just, sadly, much more complicated than that usually. But having methodologies to deal with discomfort is a lot of the healing journey for me still at this point
Yep.
because those are skills I never got. And so it's so easy. Our brains are so powerful and they do what they know. Homeostasis is a powerful force. So it is constant, reminding myself and just, beginning again and beginning again and continuing to do the work. But it was, so, I mean, what I would say to someone who's going through now what we went through then is to survive.
Yeah.
A,
Yeah.
because that's what we need you to do is
Yep.
survive. And then as you go on your journey, if you can hear someone asking you to take care of yourself a little sooner than I did and understand that that's going to be a huge benefit to you,
Yeah.
then, you just take it one step at a time.
Yeah, and just to have some compassion for yourself because when you're in that survival, as much as you may try, or for me, as much as I tried, it it wasn't possible for me to actually feel what was going on. Like and this is actually the next thing I wanted to touch upon is that healing is a nonlinear journey. And so you mentioned that in your book, and it is so true. It's true with your daughter, it's true with you. And it's same thing with me and my daughter. I thought I was, okay, over it. We've had 3 years where there's been no crisis. But then I found that I was depressed. And I'm like, why am I depressed? Things are finally calm. But it's because, hey, guess what? Now that things are safe, you can feel these things that you weren't able to feel back then. So it's that up and down. You're feeling okay, but then you're always needing to be aware of things feel off and finding, like you said, that homeostasis. So with that in mind, tell me a little bit about how your and your daughter's healing journey has been since she's been back and in recovery and how things are going now.
Yeah, well, things are, just better than I could have ever imagined. I mean, we are 12 years, into this journey. She's going to be turning 26. Ooh, I'm dating myself there in December, so about a month from now, actually. So
Yeah.
that's very exciting.
Amazing.
She loves her job. She lives with her boyfriend. They've been together for several years. She's living her life. It's not perfect, of course. She's not perfect, of course. I'm not perfect. But we are, I never had the opportunity to have this relationship with my mom. And I knew the first time I got into therapy, my daughter was 6 months old because I was so concerned that I was going to, not understand why, but just have my daughter feel about me the kind of way that I felt about my mom because our relationship was so complicated. And it's not, not that she didn't love me, and all that stuff, but it just didn't work right, quote unquote. So to see us now and to see the person that she has become, the adult that she's become, the adult that I become now that I'm in my, mid 50s,
Mhm.
and the relationship we have coming from not understanding what like a secure attachment would be
Mhm.
to seeing that more realized, to her individuating exactly the way she's supposed to be doing, but us
Yeah.
still have our closeness intact, and to know to say to each other all the time, I love you, using all three words. That's a big
Mhm.
deal. If you, since you read the book,
Yep.
um, I mean, I just really could not have imagined that things would turn out this way. So I do want people to know there is hope. There's a
Mhm.
lot of hope. But ultimately, I'll say again what I already said, the only people we can control is ourselves. And I firmly believe the only reason that I have the relationship with my daughter that I do is because I finally learned that lesson and took my goggles off and pointed them at myself
Yeah.
and was like, okay, we did an exercise that I explain in the book in residential treatment where it was like I was slapped in the face. Now, granted, this was like the worst time of my life. So
Yeah.
if I did that exercise at any other time in my life, it wouldn't have gone that way.
Right.
But the point is, that's where I was, and that's when we did
Mhm.
it, and that's what changed things around. And so it's like, you know, I talk to a lot of people now in my family, in my friends, and outside of my family, and they're struggling, and their relationships are a struggle, and they want other people to this and other people to that, and
Mhm.
I so get it, but
Yeah.
there we are. We can't do anything about those other people. The only person we can do anything about it is ourselves.
Yeah.
And I was just, I didn't, I didn't have good friendships. I mean, there was all kinds of relationship problems in my life, and none of that is the same anymore. And it's not that I'm just so great and whatever. It's like, no, I got stripped down to the nub bare,
Yeah.
hit the bottom, and have scratched and clawed my way back to where I am now, and I wouldn't change a second of it. And I don't think my daughter would either. I would change it for her
Yeah.
because I would never, no one wants their child to suffer. But
Right.
to see where we are now, I don't think either one would have changed, anything we went through to be where we are now.
It's so beautifully put. And it's really so great that this challenging and terrible and hard experience, you and your daughter have been able to come out on the other side closer and with a better relationship with each other and with yourselves. And that is a really great reminder to those parents who may be in the thick of it right now to one step at a time. And this is the end goal. This is where you're headed, and to hold on to that hope that that's what's possible. And I'd love to be able to just close this out with a quote that you had in your book that I loved so much, and I would love for my audience to hear it. And that is, in order to connect to anyone else in compassion, I first had to connect that way with myself. So beautiful, so true in your relationships and with your personal journey. And I loved this book. I appreciated it so much, and I will for sure put a link to the book in the description for the show. I highly recommend reading it to all of my listeners. And as we close out, any final words? Where can people find you? Tell us where people can go from here if they would like to learn more.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so I have a very robust, wonderful website, if I do say so myself. So you can find out all about me, and you can see more about the book and about workshops and all kinds of things at TraceyYokasCreates.com. So it's just my name, TraceyYokas, and the word creates.com. And the book's available everywhere books are sold. I really did want to and appreciate you saying so more than you know. Get something into the world so that parents who are going through now what we did then would know that they are not alone. Because I thought I was the only person on the planet who was suffering like this. No one could possibly understand my pain. Of course, it didn't take me very long to realize just how wrong I was. And yes, I mean, understanding the need to offer myself forgiveness, myself compassion, all the things I wanted to have for and with my daughter, that I had to have those things for and with myself first, really changed everything about everything. So thank you so much for pointing that out and for providing this opportunity for this conversation and all the conversations you're having.
Well, thank you for coming on. And again, I appreciate you taking the time. And this is so valuable. Thank you for the work you're putting into the world. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.